Best two words in sports. For many of you, maybe game 7. We will supplant it this week with game week. All right, for the college football fan, of course. Welcome into USC Trojans Live. We've come your way each and every week now for 17 consecutive weeks. So make this a stop on your Tuesday, 4 p.m. Eastern time, 1 o'clock Pacific time. And the guy that makes it all go, Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire. Matt, how you doing today?
It is game week. I know it's only Rice, but it's still game week. And, we get to see Lincoln Riley's shiny new toys. We get to see a new era of USC football. We get to see a Los Angeles Coliseum where fans are going to be excited to be there instead of feeling imprisoned, which was certainly the last couple years of the Clay Helton era. And, early last year, fans weren't attending because they were rightly making their statement with their wallet, we're not going to give money to this football program, to this athletic department, as long as Clay Helton was still around. Why should we contribute to that? We're going to withhold our dollars until the axe falls. And Mike Bohn acted quickly within the context of the 2021 season. He acted after week 2. He didn't wait. And that period, firing Helton early, obviously a very untraditional move, firing your coach after 2 weeks. That's not normally done in the industry, as you well know, but doing that early, it allowed for the courtship of Lincoln Riley. It allowed for him to, really search and get a sense of what elite candidates were thinking, if they were maybe a little bit dissatisfied, as Lincoln Riley turned out to be at Oklahoma. So Mike Bohn and Brandon Sosna, Sosna's now left for the NFL and the Cleveland Browns, but Bohn and Sosna, by acting early in September, they were able to, transform the USC program. So here we are a year later. We go from USC being fully irrelevant to fully relevant, or at least in a position to reclaim full relevance, the kind of relevance it had in the Pete Carroll era. So, there's all this optimism. I mean, now the Rice game, obviously we'll talk about a little more, but just to kind of set the stage, we shouldn't overreact either direction. If USC wins by 70, it doesn't mean that the Trojans are on their way. If they win by 20 and it's ugly as hell, we shouldn't think, oh, this season's going to be horrible. I mean, we saw week 0, all the different and abrupt shifts in those games. It looked like at one point that Nebraska was going to beat Northwestern by 30. Up 14-3, up by 28-17. There were a couple times in that game where it looked, hey, Scott Frost has it all together. He figured it out. Whoopsie, just a couple plays, couple decisions. And then Vanderbilt just got out of bed the wrong way. Gives up the early touchdown, throws the ball away on 4th and 5. And you think, well, same old Vanderbilt. Well, an hour later, Commodores were rolling, and they eventually won by 53 points. So, point being, in week 1, let's not say, oh, national champions, oh, they're going to be 7-5. Let's just wait and see. And of course, the Stanford game, that's a part of the story of the Rice game, is that how does it set up the program for Stanford in week 2? That's really going to be my main focus. Our players going to be in a better situation to play well against Stanford. That's one of the parts of this Rice season opener for the Lincoln Riley era at USC.
Folks, now is the time to get locked in on a number of platforms involving Matt and myself. First and foremost, here we've got on the banner, Get Off My Pylon, Matt's weekly podcast that you can catch on the College Football Coast to Coast network. And that's also on Red Circle. If you just look up College Football Coast to Coast, you can find it there. You will also find, if you're interested in the Big Ten, podcast by myself that launched on Monday, Big Ten Paradigm. Yes, so Matt and I both pleased to be partnered here on the Voice of College Football, and then over there on College Football Coast to Coast as well. And again, we will be here every Tuesday, 1 Pacific. So lock it in for the football season and beyond. We'll get you hooked during football season, and then you won't want to turn us off for the other stretch of the 52 weeks. Right, Matt. Yes, USC and Rice. We will be joined a little bit later in the show by Steve Helwig from SB Nation to give us a quick scouting report on the Rice Owls. But of course, they're kind of the afterthought. Of course, it's all about USC, game preparation, season preparation. What is this team going to look like? And, you raised a few topics before we started to record in regards to, yes, for the ardent fan that wants to see beyond, okay, the final score is going to be 52-10. What is going to play out both in regards to offensive play calling, rotations at wide receiver, rotations on the defensive line, for example, who's going to get playing time, and what player personnel groupings are going to be involved. So, how do you look at that in regards to what's going to pique your interest?
Yeah, so I think a first priority in a game such as this against Rice, where winning really should not be a question, in the second half of the game. Obviously you need to establish a solid lead, but then after halftime, like this game should not be competitive on the scoreboard. And so obviously this game was scheduled for a reason, right? Because you have a new coach, new system, new everything. You want this first week to get acclimated, shake off the rust, get some live action, and get a full sense of where players stand, offense and defense. So if I'm Lincoln Riley, let's start on the offense. If I'm Lincoln Riley, I don't want to give David Shaw and Stanford too much to look at. I want to keep my playbook vanilla. There are a lot of teams, playing, extremely competitive and significant games in week one: Notre Dame, Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, Utah, Florida, etc. Those games, you got to open up the playbook, do whatever it takes to win. Obviously, USC is not in that same situation. And I think if I'm Lincoln Riley, I try to run the ball. Like, I don't want Caleb Williams to have to, carry too big a burden in this game. Why not ease him in? Why not allow veterans such as Travis Dye and Austin Jones to get some more carries? And why not allow that offensive line, to do a lot more run blocking? I think later in the season, when Caleb Williams is going to have to make more plays to win big games, Oregon State, Utah, other tricky games that'll come along, then that offensive line is going to be asked to do more pass blocking. So in this game, let's just try to pound it. Let's try to establish total physical dominance, sprinkle in some pass plays when needed, but, create a shorter game. And let's keep in mind that, the offensive line is not especially deep. Now, the starters are expected to be very, very good. Andrew Voorhees, Brett Nealon, Jonah Monheim, and the rest. That the starters are expected to be good, but with a thin overall offensive line group where that second unit, is not especially deep. You don't want to have a game with too many plays against Rice. You don't want to have, an overload of snaps, and you don't want to try and cram in as much action as humanly possible. You want to save your offensive line starters for Stanford, so you don't want to have to rotate in as much as you might. You don't want to have to rotate too often. I mean, you're going to have to rotate players in, but you don't want to have to do that too much. So I think a run-first approach against Rice makes sense, with a modest amount of passes. Try to hit big plays, establishing a run, getting in a 2nd and 1, 2nd and 2, maybe then taking some deep shots. And if the deep shot doesn't land, well, you still have 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2. You can still pound out the first down and move down the field. So I would say a run-first approach on offense, and getting everybody involved, spreading the wealth around. Like you obviously you don't need Travis Dye to win this game. You don't need Jordan Addison in the passing game to win. Get everybody involved. Get everyone some feel heading into Stanford in week 2. And then on the defense, I think this is where things get really interesting for USC. Not so much how does this group perform against Rice. That's not really the measurement. It's more about playing players and how often and how frequently players get rotated into the game. Had an interesting conversation on our Trojans Wired podcast, which is going to be released later this week. It's a really fascinating tension point. Do you want to play the defensive starters deep into the second half because this unit is so unproven and because Alex Grinch needs to see where the starters are at. Valid line of reasoning. But the other thought is, because you have concerns about depth, let's be sure to play your backups as much as possible, get them a lot of time, put them in live game situations so that you get to see where a larger number of players stand in terms of your evaluation and giving more players a chance to look at film of Rice so that they can make course corrections heading into Stanford. Like there are strong convincing arguments for both lines of thought, playing the defense longer, the starting defense longer, or going into your too deep a little bit more in the second half of that game. And it's a fascinating question. Now, personally, I lean toward let's play more players. Let's see where more players are at because you might need them later. And maybe you will unearth some surprises, like maybe a backup for this game against Rice shows really well. Maybe that's a player who deserves more reps against Stanford and then going forth for the rest of the season. Like, in other words, there are several players that are obviously, locks as starters and who are, legitimately strong players. Tuli Tuipulotu, obviously. I think Raylan Goforth as well at linebacker. Shane Lee as well. Mekhi Blackman and Kalen Bullock in the secondary. Like those guys, there's no question about their statuses. But in terms of the defensive front, the other positions, not Tuipulotu, you might need to rotate a lot of players in to see where your defensive line is at. And so, that just kind of leads to a larger point, and that is that it's easy for fans and analysts to focus on, who's the starter, who's the backup, what's the depth chart looking like. USC didn't release one. Lincoln Riley, that's Lincoln Riley. He keeps his cards close to the vest. But I don't think for this Rice game we should focus on the starting and backup assignments too much, because if you play a lot of different players and you get a look at a lot of different guys, the 1 versus 2 on the depth chart doesn't mean a whole lot. Going into Stanford, that's when the depth chart and who's starting and who's being the backup, then it's going to matter a little bit more. And we're going to get more of a sense about the identity of this defense. But anyway, so how many snaps various players get on defense, I think that's the number one point of intrigue in this game, and especially along the defensive line. That does Alex Grinch walk away from this Rice game getting a much better sense of his 4 best defensive linemen, of his best rush end. Corey Foreman's hasn't been able to practice nearly as much as the whole staff wanted. Romello Height hasn't been fully healthy at the same rush end position. So I say rotate more players, not fewer. Get a look at more guys across more snaps, and then maybe you can arrive at a new line of thought and a new assessment of your defense heading into week 2 on the farm against Stanford.
Matt Zemek and myself join you every Tuesday right here at the Voice of College Football USC, and we will have USC post-game following the Rice game with Tony, Tim, and Rick for our USC post-game. We appreciate those guys coming together to break down USC football right after the final tick off the clock. You can catch, again, Matt's work at Trojans Wire and his new podcast, Get Off My Pylon, which debuted this week, and we will have the link in the live chat here in just a second. Notre Dame fan here, D-Rock Irish, going from the nuts and bolts of personnel groupings and how to approach that to the big picture excitement level of USC football and where it stands for Lincoln Riley, and this being a non-marquee game. What can we expect that crowd to look like on Saturday at the Coliseum?
So this is obviously the world of speculation, which is part of the college football punditry business. I would expect, a good crowd. I don't think every seat's going to be filled. I think it's going to be a crowd where, the very top of the Coliseum, might be empty, but like almost all of it's going to be filled. So I would say it's been reconfigured and downsized to have a capacity of about 78,000. So I would say something in the neighborhood of 65 to 70,000 for this game.
All right. We've got Steve Heltwick waiting in the wings here in a few minutes, going to join us from SB Nation. And, certainly Matt, myself, we understand the scope of each game. So as we bring on opponents' media, no disrespect to any particular opponent, but we know that you don't need to hear us break down Rice football for 45 minutes. So we'll just bring on Steve, get the quick 3 to 4 minutes on Rice, maybe some players to look out for that will get you more acquainted for your viewing pleasure there on Saturday. Of course, when we're looking at Stanford, Oregon State, and certainly UCLA and Notre Dame down the stretch, then of course we're going to be having more in-depth discussions about those matchups. All right. The quarterback situation with Caleb Williams coming in. Miller Moss certainly is a highly touted prospect coming out of high school, and we got to see a little bit of him last year. Are you curious to see him run the offense for a significant amount of time? Let's say the game's out of hand mid-third quarter, to give him a long run of play for, let's say, a quarter and a half?
I think so. If USC is leading like 42-10 midway through the third quarter, yes, give the keys to Miller Moss for the final 20, 25 minutes of the game. I mean, this is the one true cupcake on the schedule. Fresno State's not a cupcake in week 3. Then you have Notre Dame, and then all the rest are Pac-12 games. Now, you probably will get a chance to play Moss second half against Colorado. Also against Arizona State, teams that expected to be at the bottom of the Pac-12. But Rice is an obvious opportunity. And we should say, just in case anyone's missed this storyline from August camp, that Miller Moss has impressed Lincoln Riley and the staff, gotten very good reviews. Lincoln Riley has expressed confidence in Miller Moss to lead this team if needed. So, that being the case, like if the coaches really mean what they say, and if you do say something as a coach, you need to be accountable for it. And that needs to be manifested in your actions and how you manage the roster. Yeah, he needs to play. He needs to get at least 20 minutes, like at least 4 possessions, a significant amount of reps in this game so that, none of us wants Caleb Williams to get hurt. But if it happens, like, you will need to play Miller Moss in this game so that he gets the seasoning. He gets the live action that will enable him to be ready in case, the scenario no one wants is the scenario that actually happens. So yeah, there's a real need to play Moss more than just, very end of the game mop up time. He needs to get real minutes, real snaps. He needs to be given a chance to throw the ball down the field, work within the offense. So I would say at least a quarter and a half, like mid-third quarter, if USC's up 28 or more, you need to put him in the game. You need to see what he can do.
USC should be able to physically overwhelm Rice, a program that hasn't posted a winning record since 2014. That said, there's always the thought process of how much can we glean from this game because of the physical mismatch. For me, there are things like quarterback, wide receiver, rapport, and are they on the same page? Are we seeing when the quarterback improvises that the receivers and the quarterback are not on the same page, or when there's options in the passing game and the wide receiver has the ability to look at what's going on in the secondary and break off routes, but there's misconnections there. If there's a particular offensive lineman, especially on the perimeter at one of the tackle spots, that's getting beat by a player on a Rice roster, then okay, this isn't boding well for more difficult opponents. Let's say after the first or second cornerback, if those third and fourth cornerbacks are getting burned a couple times on one-on-one situations, what's going to happen when they're facing more talented players? So even if the overall score is 4 or 5 touchdowns, you can get those indicators of okay, where could this football team be taken advantage of later by a better opponent? What did they need to clean up?
No question about it. And they're like, Rice could drop an easy 75-yard touchdown pass. So you're never going to see that in the box score. But, you have a blown assignment, a missed coverage, something like that. So absolutely. And that's, going back to 2021 and remembering how awful this defense was, so that's going to be certainly an item to watch in this Rice game. That if, Rice scoring 28 points would be like UCLA scoring 62. We could make that kind of comparison. And last year, as soon as USC's defense got punched in the mouth, wave the white flag. The surrender cobra just was not able to mount any real resistance. For almost all of the season, the BYU game was really an exception. That was a game where USC put up a fight for 4 full quarters. When it got punched in the mouth, it was able to respond well, took that game right down to the wire. BYU narrowly escaped, and that was a good BYU team that USC almost beat. We didn't see that level of fight from the USC defense for the vast majority of the 2021 season. So in many ways, part of this Rice game is just, it's not likely to be ultra competitive, but if Rice lands a blow early, like how does that team respond? Do you see a very authoritative response on the next drive, on the next possession, things like that? Watching bad things happen, but then immediately getting things back together, immediately rallying around a situation and making course corrections in the heat of battle, seeing those kinds of responses, that's going to be part of the value of this game. And Rice is not ultra threatening, but if something bad happens, like this is the first game of the season, it's only going to get tougher from here. So this is a good trial run, to see how these guys respond in live situations.
And for all the fans that believe that USC is going to run away with this game, me included, most likely that is going to be the case. But we'll be here 1 week from today, and there will have been 3 or 4 Power 5 versus Group of 5 games that were double-digit spreads that got a little dicey in the fourth quarter. Oklahoma and Tulane come to mind in week 1 last year, and that was not a Tulane team that was as good as its predecessors. That Tulane team was typically winning 7 games and going to a bowl game. Last year's team was awful. We didn't know it at the time. But week 1, they were at midfield with a shot to get a first down to keep a drive alive at 40-35 with about 2 minutes left in the game. So it's going to happen somewhere.
And we all know who the head coach was for the higher ranked team in that game, a guy named Lincoln Riley. But that point aside, week 1, we mentioned week 0 and how so many games just had these abrupt shifts. And hey, like UConn was a 23-point dog, I think, got a quick 14-0 lead on the road at Utah State. Weird things happen. And so a small part of me, not the majority part, but a small part of me would like to see Rice get a 7-0 lead. And that might be better than USC bolting to the 28-0 first quarter lead. Is that, this isn't automatic. We actually have to go out and make the effort every play. That could be kind of like this little splash of cold water that these guys need. I have made the point in previous episodes in the month of August here at the Voice of College Football that I don't want an opener that goes perfectly. That would be bad. I don't want players to walk away from this thinking, hey, we got this. Like we know exactly what to do. I hope there are enough mistakes. You don't want too many of them, but just enough mistakes that the coaches can get after these guys in the film room and on the practice field next week, so that there isn't a sense of overconfidence going to Stanford. Like that's a slight concern that, hey, we have Lincoln Riley, we have Caleb Williams. What could possibly go wrong? Definitely don't want the team to go to the farm in week 2 thinking that way. And, it's Lincoln Riley, I'm sure, is telling his players, focus on the assignment. We're trying to restore USC. We need to have a professional culture. We need to do things the right way. He can say all those things until he's blue in the face, but human nature being what it is, right? All the hype, all the pageantry and the excitement and the enthusiasm. It's certainly going to be human nature for a lot of these players to think that their talent is just going to be able to carry them, and that they don't make the extra effort, or they don't tend to the extra details, and that could lead to an early season ambush, which knocks the whole campaign off track. So against Rice, I want to see enough mistakes that the coaching staff, has an easy opening to say, see that, that's not even close to what you need to do, where you need to be. And so we get some vigilance and some accountability from the players, like they realize by themselves in a way that like no one needs to belabor the point. Like they can just see it on film. Like, oh, I'm not ready. I'm not fully there. I want that going into Stanford and the rest of the season. That's an important piece of all this.
Folks, we've got you covered when it comes to USC football. Matt and I are here every Tuesday at 1 o'clock Pacific time, so make that a staple. Of course, Matt's reporting every day on Trojans Wire, so get on over there to Trojans Wire. Check out Matt's work there. We will have USC post-game with Tim, Tony, and Rick after the ball game each and every week, starting with this Rice game. And then, of course, check out Matt's new podcast, Get Off My Pylon, and check that out. I've not heard, I actually started to, it was my intent. I had it on for about the first 30 to 40 seconds, but got pulled away from a bunch of phone calls, and I had
life gets in the way
this afternoon, but I will be listening intently because Matt's a bastion of knowledge across the board with college football, but specifically out there in the Pac-12 with a slice of Mountain West as well.
And when I get done with some freelance work later today, I'm going to definitely pop on your premiere episode of Big Ten Paradigm, which I invite all our USC fans. Like, this is going to be our future home, guys. So you want to listen to Mark Rogers at Big Ten Paradigm, his podcast, part of the College Football Coast to Coast Network at Red Circle.
And yours is released each week on what day?
Tuesday.
Yours is on Tuesday, the Big Ten Paradigm on Monday. Matt, when you look at the USC schedule, I don't know if you've given it some kind of difficulty ranking, if you did anything where you released, let's say, in order, which are the most difficult games. But as you navigate through the 22 schedule, where do you think the potholes lie, and maybe some of the unexpected potholes?
Well, I've said from the beginning, and so it's worth saying one more time before we get this party started with the 2022 regular season. The Oregon State game in week 4. I think that is the focal point of the season. Obviously, Utah is a showcase game. Notre Dame is a showcase game. But the Oregon State game is just that, it's that hinge point moment where the season either goes up or down. And the odds of USC reaching its goals, either, will soar or they'll crash. And it's that game in Corvallis. Because it's early in the season, because it's a road game, and because, Oregon State has the tools needed to beat USC. Like Oregon State, with the offensive line, with a commitment to the ground game, it's obvious, it's out there. You can see that Oregon State is a team built to control the ball for 38, 39, 40 minutes, keep Caleb Williams on the sideline. Like that is just a classic blueprint for beating this USC team, which is not especially proven up front on the defensive line. It's a matchup that begs for trouble. And so if USC gets through that game, I think USC is going to go 8-1 in the Pac-12, which means USC is going to play in the Pac-12 title game, which means USC is going to get a New Year's Six bowl invitation. So many goals of the season, in my mind, rest on that Oregon State game. In terms of the other pothole game, Washington State, just because if Cam Ward gets hot, that is a potential for danger. Now, I know that USC thrashed Washington State last year in Pullman with, a team that was not very good and still had so many more athletes than Washington State did. I'm not too worried about it, but there is that one David versus Goliath slingshot. If Cam Ward just plays out of his mind and the USC defense doesn't have an answer for it, that game could get a little thorny. But other than that, I think it's pretty smooth sailing. I think the Pac-12 is a pretty weak conference. I think USC is, miles better than UCLA. And then at the bottom, you have just a lot of filler. You have a lot of fluff. Like Arizona State's going to be bad. Colorado is going to be bad. Arizona is going to be better than it was last year, but still not particularly strong. Cal might finish last because Brett Johnson, its best defensive player, is out for the season with an injury. That is, you look at the Cal roster, 2 or 3 players that Cal simply could not afford to lose. Brett Johnson was one of them. So Cal might actually be worse than Colorado at the very bottom of the league. So that's not going to be a game that will remotely threaten USC. So there's a lot of fluff on the schedule. Pac-12 fluff, I should say. Like, it's not as though USC is scheduling a lot of fluff, only the Rice game. Fresno State, that could be a challenging game in September. Fresno State won at UCLA a year ago, so that could be a threat. So, there are a few games, Fresno State, Washington State, but especially Oregon State, in terms of those non-Utah, non-Notre Dame games on the 2022 schedule for USC.
4-8 doesn't sound too impressive. Of course, that was USC's mark last year. That was also Rice's record, 4-8. But the first time they cracked 3 wins since 2015, they haven't won more than they've lost since a bowl victory and an 8-5 record in 2014. We got Steve Helwick on the line from SB Nation's Underdog Dynasty to talk up some Rice Owls football for us. Steve, how you doing?
I'm doing excellent. Just tuned in and heard you and Matt talking USC football this year, and I'm excited for this game around the corner. I'm about to fly out to LA to experience the atmosphere there for my first time, so really looking forward to the California weather and the California atmosphere there.
Taking in double duty, correct, Steve, with UCLA and USC?
Yes, UCLA Bowling Green in the morning and Pacific time, and then going about 30 minutes across downtown to get to the LA Coliseum to go to Rice USC.
What are you looking forward to in this game, Steve? What are some tension points, plot points that you are focused on in terms of studying this game, studying the Trojans, studying what Rice brings to the table and how this game's going to evolve?
Well, it was just brought up in Mike Bloomgren's press conference that Rice has really surprised some teams in covering the spread early on and playing really well in their openers lately. In 2019, against an Army team coming off an excellent season, that Army was coming off that 70-14 win over Houston. They barely beat Rice 14-7 that year. Then last year, Arkansas, they storm into Arkansas. Right. They hold a 17-7 lead in the middle of that third quarter over a Razorback team that eventually finished 9-4. So Rice has been able to start well against marquee opponents on their schedule lately. Now, this is a different animal in USC, and this USC team is very hard to it's hard to predict because there's so many moving parts. Like, every skill position player on offense that's going to start is from another school. We haven't seen this unit together. It's like a bunch of free agents assembled at once. So it's very hard to get a good grip, a good read on this USC team, which is, I think, something that Rice is having trouble in film study because you're studying guys that are coming from Pitt, from Colorado, from Stanford, from Oklahoma, all different places. And there's also a few starters on defense too. You're looking at guys from Auburn and Colorado, and there's just so many different players that have assembled into this one USC team. So it's a really unique college football squad to watch out for in 2022.
So if you're Rice's offensive coordinator, how do you start this game? How do you attack USC's, vulnerable, limited defense? Where do you go first in terms of pressure points?
And their offensive coordinator is pretty familiar with Pac-12 country. That's Marquez Tuiasosopo, former Washington Husky quarterback and played for the Oakland Raiders and New York Jets. And attacking the USC defense, Rice always says they love to pound the rock and control the clock, and that is their number one strategy. That is how they beat a number 15 ranked Marshall team in the 2020 season, was they just basically ate up the entire time of possession. They finished top 10 in possession last year, as they do in most years in the Bloomgren era, and it's a very similar style to those Stanford offenses that you would see when Mike Bloomgren was there in the mid-2010s. So they're going to want to run the football really well, but in my opinion, I think that Rice's strong point in the offense is the receivers now. This is the most loaded receiving group that Rice has had in the Mike Bloomgren era. They get Brad Rosner, who was their star receiver in 2019. He comes back after playing 2 quarters in the last 2 seasons. He has had horrible injury luck, says he feels better than ever now. and is ready to return to the lineup. And then Rice just got a massive haul from the transfer portal in terms of receivers. They got Isaiah Esdale from West Virginia, very experienced, had 100 yards against Texas Tech last year. You got Sam Crawford, someone who played a big role for Tulsa when Tulsa was really good in that 2020 season. And then you get Luke McCaffrey, who moves from quarterback to wide receiver, and every player and coach is saying what an incredible camp he has and what an explosive player he is. Just a natural athlete that you see in that McCaffrey family that produced Max and Christian and Ed and so many other great receivers or receiving running backs in that lineage. So I think that Rice's receiving core is stacked. They decided on Wiley Green as their starting quarterback, who has been the starter for week 1 in 2019 and in 2021. So the receivers core is going to take them as far as Wiley Green takes them. So they're going to need a big game from their quarterback.
So how do you sequence plays? Do you run to set up the pass? Do you pass to set up the run? What's your first down, second down play mixture? Any particular thoughts on that?
I'd say you'd run to set up the pass, and that's a similar approach to what they took against Arkansas last year. They played a little more conservative in the early going in that game, and once things opened up in the run game for them, they started taking a deep shots, and that's how Wiley Green connected with August Pete for that touchdown, which gave them the 17-7 lead in the third quarter. So I think that Rice needs to establish that run game first and show enough lethalness in that run game in order to open up the pass. But I think that these receivers are really good. I think that there's guys that can make plays in open space. Isaiah Esdale did a lot of that at West Virginia. And from what I've seen with Luke McCaffrey, he's somebody who you could throw on a bubble screen, a tunnel screen, and just watch him move because he moves so well in open space. So I think that it's a good substitution you can do if the run game doesn't work early on.
All right. Now, one of the big questions with the USC roster, rush end, the edge rusher on the outside, Corey Foreman's been injured. His progress has been slowed and limited. Romello Height, another rush end, transfer from Auburn. He's been dinged up a little bit, hasn't had, maximum participation throughout August camp. So how do Rice's offensive tackles shape up on the edge, providing pass protection, against USC's USC pass rush core that, has a lot to prove and really does not enter this game in the best of situations?
Yeah, that's not the matchup I focused as much on with the offensive line versus the defensive line, because I look at a name like Tuli Tuipulotu in the middle there, and Rice's best linemen are all on the interior. So that's where the marquee matchup is on the offensive line. But the outsides, you get a West Virginia transfer and John Hughes, who's going to start at right tackle, and then Clay Servin, a longtime tenured Rice player, who's going to start at left tackle. Rice didn't have the best pass protection last year, but with full health in the offensive line, which is something that they were not given the luxury of last year, maybe they hope that the pass protection improves this year with this really veteran unit that has a ton of collegiate starts under their belt. But still, I do think that USC has a ton of athletes down there that can swarm past Rice's defenders. I think Nick Figueroa is still starting on that line, and he's a name that I look to in order to spearhead some of that pass rush for USC. So I think that Rice might struggle a little bit in this area still, even with USC being a little dinged up.
Steve, of course, in USC camp, among the fans, especially in a week in which they're playing Rice, there's always an eye on a few other programs, and UCLA's near the top of that list, if not at the top. So since you're going out to cover both games and both teams this weekend, what's your initial thought about the Bruins possibly competing in the Pac-12?
Well, I actually picked – okay, don't get mad at me, USC fans in here. I just don't know enough about this USC team yet to know if they're going to the Pac-12 championship game. I think Utah's great, and I picked UCLA as the other team to make the Pac-12 championship in there.
That's worse. That's worse than not picking USC. It's that you are picking UCLA.
Yeah, I'm not usually controversial. I don't usually like to throw myself into the fire, but
you make an exception out of USC. Yeah, nice.
I do like the makeup of this UCLA team because I have more certainty. I like to base things on what I've seen already. And I've seen this UCLA team have the 11th best rushing attack in college football. And you have guys returning from that. You have DTR remaining at quarterback for his fourth and a half straight year as a starter there. And just like USC, this is a team that really loaded on the defensive side of the ball with transfers, getting Gabriel Murphy, who was a really talented pass rusher at North Texas. He's someone who can really spearhead that pass rush there at UCLA. So UCLA went 8-4 last year, and I think that they can build on. I like them building on just the good season that they had already under Chip Kelly. And they were a couple close losses away from maybe even getting 10 wins. That game against Oregon late in there, and that Fresno State game where Jake Haener just had his late game heroicism where he threw the game-winning touchdown injured. So I do think that UCLA is going to be a very good team this year. But I did hear your point earlier before I came on that there are a lot of weak teams in the Pac-12 this year. And I think that Utah, UCLA, and USC should probably separate from the rest of the bunch. I'm still not really sold on Oregon with how much talent that they have to replace at the moment. So
Mark knows I'm not sold on Oregon either.
I do not believe in the Ducks right now. So I think I believe more in USC than Oregon with all their incoming talent. But I do like the makeup of the Bruins this year just because of their returning talent. I like their run game a lot, and I think they can build off of what they accomplished last year in their first winning season under Chip Kelly.
Well, Steve, enjoy the trip out to Southern California, checking out the Bruins and the Trojans in separate venues, just a half hour away. But we appreciate you stopping by, Steve. As always, everybody check out Steve's work at Underdog Dynasty and also Hustle Belt there on SB Nation. Steve, enjoy your trip.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Steve.
So there it is. Double dip for Steve with USC and UCLA. And of course, they will see each other the second to last game of the season.
I hadn't really, connected the dots. Like I just wasn't really conscious of it because, it's Rice. Like I am not throwing myself deep into the weeds with Rice preparation and study. But yeah, Mike Bloomgren, Stanford, David Shaw. So like USC will be getting like a David Shaw concept in week 1 leading into Stanford in week 2. So that, that's an unexpected little bonus for the Trojans in terms of how they study, how they prepare, and what Alex Grinch can look at. And let's remind ourselves, this is a good point too. Alex Grinch used to coach in the Pac-12 against Stanford, against David Shaw. So when he goes up against the Mike Bloomgren scheme, that's going to be a lead into week 2 on the farm against the Trees. So that's an extra note of optimism in terms of USC avoiding the banana peel against Stanford in week 2, that Rice is going to help in certain ways because you're going to see Stanford concepts and a Stanford mentality against Rice and Stanford.
Folks, this is your destination every Tuesday, 4 Eastern, 1 Pacific time. Bring a friend or two with you next week as we prep USC Stanford. And of course, get on over to Trojans Wire, check out Matt's work there and his new podcast that releases each and every Tuesday. The first edition is out. There it is. Get Off My Pylon with Matt. Yes.
Which I should say is it's a Pac-12 podcast, also a Western college football podcast. So you're basically going to get like an 80-20 content mix, 80% Pac-12, 20% Mountain West every week. So in this week's episode, we're looking at Oregon, Georgia. We're looking at Utah, Florida. Obviously, the 2 showcase games in the Pac-12. Those are the feature parts of this first edition of Get Off My Pylon.
And I guarantee everyone a good time with USC post-game here at the Voice of College Football on our USC channel with Tony Altimore, with Tim Prangley. Rick Anaya is going to be there to break down USC football each and every week. That should be a phenomenal time with those guys.
I'm definitely going to be watching while I right away at Trojans Wire filing those post-game stories.
We can't have Matt all the time. He has other work to do. So we bring him in here as much as we possibly can. And again, our marquee time is every Tuesday, 1 Pacific, everyone. So we will see you all back here next Tuesday. Matt, enjoy the football this weekend.
Can't wait. Now, and this is going to be the only Pac-12 network game for USC this year. So, not only am I looking forward to this game, I'm also looking forward to it ending, because bye-bye Pac-12 network. See ya.
We'll see everybody in about 25 minutes for Iowa Hawkeyes Live over on the Hawkeyes channel at the Voice of College Football. See you then.